depending on who is asking the question and who is answering it. So we have more people coming through. It's a very large room tonight, so it is going to take me a few minutes to organise. And lovely to see you. We might get you in the mood by imagining that it's a balmy, it's not really balmy, is it? It's sort of like a chilly but not freezing night tonight at Avid Reader. And just imagine that you're all crowded on the back deck. We've booked far more people that can actually fit on the back deck. So you're very lucky to be shoulder to shoulder with everyone tonight, and imagine that you're all got glasses of mulled wine, there's chatter, there's an excitement in the room, and we're about to start. So I am walking up to the microphone now. Hello everyone, I am Chrissy Nee, and you are at an Avid Reader launch. We have been running launches since the pandemic began on Zoom, and this is one that we've been looking forward to because this was scheduled to be an event in real life, but it's moved into this virtual space over the period of time, and it's very exciting to be here with Andrew to launch the book tonight. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on. In this area here where I am, it's the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to mention that because we're in Zoom, we are zooming out onto the lands of many different Aboriginal peoples. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders on the lands on which you're meeting. So the lands that we're zooming out to, and to acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and that sovereignty was never ceded. It's a land of stories that are as old as memory can be passed down hand to hand, and we're telling another story here tonight as Andrew Boe and Chloe Hooper are in conversation about The Truth Hurts. So I'd like to introduce you to Andrew Boe, who's a barrister with chambers in Sydney and Brisbane. His legal practice, primarily in criminal and administrative law, has taken him across his adopted country, in particular places like Broome, Alice Springs, Palm Island, and more recently Yuendumu, where he has undertaken cases of national interest involving Indigenous Australians. He's also represented some notable defendants, including Ivan Milat, David Eastman, Clive Palmer, and many ordinary Australians as they encounter the justice system. He was born in Burma and arrived in Australia in 1969 as one of 5 sons to Yu Shan Bo and Do Kin Kim Nhu, who fled the military regime which nationalised industries, including his father's newspaper. So welcome, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Chris.
And I'm also going to introduce you to the wonderful Chloe Hooper, who is educated in the University of Melbourne and as a Fulbright Scholar at Columbia University. Her first novel, A Child's Book of True Crime, was a New York Times notable book, and I do remember reading that book all those years ago in Tasmania and loving it, and was very excited to read her next book, The Tall Man, which then became a multi-award-winning book. And then, of course, she followed up with another novel, The Engagement, and her latest book is a non-fiction book, The Arsonist, and we are looking forward to what she produces next. So everybody please welcome Chloe.
Thanks, Chrissy. It's very kind of you, and it's just a huge treat to be here to talk about Andrew's book. So do we go forth?
Go forth.
Yeah. I'm trying to work out, I'm sorry to be so hopeless at this, everyone. How do I see you, Andrew, here? There is...
Look towards the camera.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great. All right. I want to just congratulate Andrew on what is such a brave, unflinching, timely, important book. Andrew said to me, just don't use any adjectives when you describe this book, but I'm not going to, now that you're a writer too, I'm not going to let you dictate the terms. Thank you so much for writing it. I really believe that every Australians should read it, but it should be compulsory reading for anybody who is thinking of studying law, or it should be just, you know, given to students as they walk in the door. And I wanted to ask you, Andrew, I know for years people have approached you and wanted you to write for them, and how did this happen? How did it start?
Well, first, Chloe, thanks so much for doing this and being so generous. As I've mentioned, and my daughter Greer says don't say this, but I'll say it, that
No, don't say it. Just answer the question.
Look, I didn't set out to write a book. We've spoken about this. There was the first chapter in the book involving a case back in 2011. I remember sitting down with you, Don and Sam, and telling all of you about that experience. And I really wanted you to write that story.
Can you just tell us a bit about what that case was?
Yeah, it was the story of a case that Dominic Bonello and I did in Western Australia, involving a young man who faced a manslaughter charge for killing his close friend. And the backstory is that it's a horrific case involving a young woman who committed suicide, and in a very isolated community in Kirakara, which is on the border between Western Australia and Northern Territory, and where, you know, the people, their parents and grandparents walked out of the desert in the 80s. They'd had no contact with white Australia. And the case examined the notion of how do we accommodate the issue of traditional punishment. And I found it a case which just never quite left me. And it was great therapy, you know, to be told, just write it down, you know. And I wrote it with no other purpose than just having a record for myself that had happened. And doing it was a great relief for me, and it made me think about other cases that I'd done which sat uneasily in my head. And with the encouragement of, you know, a lot of very close friends and direction from people who I'd spoken to about these stories. So I just wrote them, and I just meant them as a little catalogue of case by case by case by case to exemplify the issues that the Australian criminal justice system grapples with. And very quickly, and for some reason, the people at Hachette thought that they could work with that and turn it into a book. And that's when, much to my embarrassment and sense of exposure, there's a personal narrative that's been weaved in to explain how it is I came across these cases. So it wasn't a project that I sat down to do like you and Chrissy do. It was therapy, frankly, because some of the cases still, you know, are difficult.
Yes, yes, you must have a lot of cases that have stuck with you. Andrew, actually, sometimes it felt like sort of you're reading this beautifully crafted, incredibly important exorcism in a way. Yes. And also a synthesis, because you are bringing your background and sensibilities and marrying them with these cases, and it sort of you know, there's something very interesting happens. And one of the things that I love about the book is that you start off and you're open. It's a sort of huge admission for a very successful writer, writer, but also lawyer, to talk about your early bunglings.
Yeah. Well, look, I took a gulp when you used the word brave just then, and also in the foreword. You know, I hear brave and I hear stupid, you know, so the difficulty is this: if you're going to examine a system and critique it from a personal perspective, and you're going to be critical, you're going to attract criticism. Right? So, and I was very mindful that it was important, if I was going to use pretentious words like the truth, that I should be truthful about who I am in that conversation. And, you know, and the story that you're speaking about, of the first trial I instructed on. And
How old were you, Andrew?
look, I was only 23 when I started my practice, so I would have only been 24.
Yeah.
And as you'll see from the explanation of how I got to that point, I basically knew nothing about criminal defence. I'd watched a few things, read a few books, but I knew nothing. And it was only in that trial that I realised how extraordinary it was that I even thought I should be doing this. You know?
Could you tell us, I mean, you paint this picture of yourself as wearing a kind of slick suit that you've bought, and just give us a couple of sentences about what that case was.
Yeah, well, it was involving an Indigenous young man who'd been charged with rape, or the old language is rape, in a park in Ipswich. It was a legally aided case, and I speak about how the barristers passed it to another due to a conflicting brief, and how I had thought that the process worked. I would get the material to the barrister, he or she, or in fact he, would work it out and tell me what to do. You know, and days before the trial starts, it gets flicked to another barrister. Nobody's told me what to do. I haven't actually got a statement from the client, and there's a real issue of whether or not it's an identity case, that is, I didn't do it, or it's a consent case. And none of those matters were examined by me. We go to trial, and I won't spoil it, you know, it unfolds very badly. And I thought it was necessary for me to include that to show that nobody in the criminal justice space is entitled to see themselves as being better or good. It's how much capacity you bring to an individual case. And it struck me down. I was almost ready to stop doing any more criminal work, but now I realise that's a long time ago. That's nearly 31 years ago. You know, so.
Yeah, I think that I like that vignette. I mean, it's horrendous in terms of how it unfolds, and that the young man's aunt is in the courtroom, who you describe the sort of scalding look that she gives you when she realises how, you know, gravely you've stuffed this up. But it really shows, you know, you realised I have to change. I need to do better. And I think that most non-Indigenous people who have tried to enter this space, you know, have a moment where they realise I have not done as good a job as I need to, and I need to do better. And in a way, your book asks us as a society to look at ourselves and to do better. You looked at yourself, but then you also looked at the legal system and thought, wait, you know, there's a potential here for sort of seismic change, for real disruption. It's, you know, and I just wanted to ask you, that's a really electric moment where you go from bumbling to actually sort of becoming a firebrand. Can you just talk about what happened in that moment, and how that your sense of expansion, and, you know, suddenly you're defending, I mean, not only Ivan Milat, but you're also doing really significant cases like Robin Kiner and a couple of others that have set a lot of legal precedents.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was saved by, you know, a very lucky collision with some really, really good lawyers who might reflect back now and think that I had the enthusiasm they wish they still had. And I grabbed it with both arms. You know, the people who were willing to say, okay, if you want to know, here it is. And I don't mean about Indigenous issues at that stage. I mean, I meant just for the basic art of being a criminal defence lawyer.
Right.
And that was searing, you know, for me, because I mean I knew nothing, but I wanted to know. And when you examine things in some detail and not be hindered by other people's restraints on how it should be, you start noticing things about the way certain things unfold. You know, this is not in the book, but I remember early on going up to do what they call a golf circuit up in far north Queensland, where a magistrate's court flies to about 4 or 5 Indigenous communities and delivers justice. And I filled in for a young lawyer who did that. Even though I was in private practice, I went and did that for a week. And I was unable to function for about 2 or 3 days after that. But I went into a friend's place and sat down and wrote an opinion piece that was run in the Australian. And
so is this in the mid-90s, just to sort of set some
context? It would have been early 90s, really, early 90s. And I was told that that article with my picture on it was on the dartboard of a police station with plenty of darts at me. So I didn't set out to be controversial about these things. I was noticing things that really knocked me over, and so I went into those matters with the singular belief, this arrogant belief that I could change this.
Yeah.
There was a young woman who was in and around our family. In fact, my eldest son's biological mother, who was getting arrested in West End, Brisbane, for swearing at police, and on one occasion being sent to jail for 3 weeks. And I found that, I still find it extraordinary that more people weren't outraged about that. So I didn't seek to go do things. It's just that having seen... What
did you do, just to explain the legal, I'm interested in the sort of legal ramifications of that outrage, because you did then take that case to, I took it
to the High Court, and along the way, you get really polemic support. You have polemic regard. There are many judges who were really supportive that I was agitating things. And I ended up in my ordinary life as a defence lawyer, acting for many of their children and neighbours, etc. Yes. Judges could see some things, but there were a lot of other judges who couldn't see me anything other than being disruptive. So,
and you describe also the fact that you'd heard some of these judges or other sort of lawyers using the same language that your friend was using at cocktail parties or whatever, but she was going to jail for it.
Yeah, and it's an astonishing thing, and and thinking back, I should have been perhaps a bit more patient, because there were other people on board. But the folly of youth, you tilt at windmills hoping that you'll knock them over. And along the way, there were some matters that brought results that I could be proud of, and there are others in which I very much failed in. So it wasn't a sense of design, and it's in that period that I started to realise that those who were given the most significant disregard were Indigenous people. And I grew up being blind to that sort of racism. It's an appalling embarrassment on my part that I do remember.
But that's, I think that your sort of outsider status has some, bearing on this story too, because you were also subjected to racism. So
yeah, but as I say in the book, I didn't notice it as much. I just I just had this extraordinary arrogance that had been instilled in me by my father, a sense of superiority. He thought all Australians were stupid, and so
perhaps he wasn't wrong.
We are, after all, the lucky country. So I was shielded by it. I didn't see myself as the other. I still don't see myself as the other. I mean, that otherness is something that's more important to others, really, than me.
I said outsider,
Yeah, and look, again, other things happen. You have children, and all of my children are Indigenous, and some of them are Burmese, and they're brown, and it became my responsibility to sit there and engage with this otherness, because they were going to face this world. I may have skated through it, but they were going to face this world. So, and I'm not sure if I've answered any of your questions, but
I also wonder whether or not you were, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but also you were kind of, I mean, that case that you had early on, that first case, I mean, in a way, were you sort of rectifying things when you had other young Indigenous kids who'd been picked up by the police, as that boy was? I mean, you were sort of paying a debt back to him too.
Yeah, but I couldn't rectify what I had done or not done. What I could do was that to make sure I never put myself or anybody else in that position again.
Yep.
And to be honest, you know, my vanity was such that I'd forgot about that case within a few years, and it's only in recent years, because I have told that story to others, but that Sam reminded me of it, and I thought it was necessary to put it in, to explain that this journey of understanding our responsibilities to the Indigenous community is an ongoing one. It's an ongoing conversation.
We first met when you had flown to Palm Island within weeks of Cameron Doomadgee being killed in the police station.
Yeah, we met in the Gin Palace, aptly named, in Melbourne, after I flew there after the funeral of Cameron. Yeah. And you know, to me, and you know this, that was the most significant thing for me, to meet somebody that was willing to jump on board, examining what was going to happen. And everybody knows that's read your book, that journey became an intense one over 10 years. Again,
this was a case where a man was supposedly being arrested for using bad language.
Yes.
And died 40 minutes later. With horrendous injuries. I know also, obviously, there are certain things you can't talk about, but you've been very involved in the death in custody, well, in the Yuendamu case. Can you give us some sort of sense, Andrew, of how far have we come in 15 years?
There's something so fatalistic about my intersection with these cases. I mean, firstly, the case we spoke about earlier, about the swearing case, I argued the matter in the High Court on the Monday. I saw the newspaper clip of Cameron Doomadgee on the Friday, and it was the same offence that each had been arrested for. Lisa got 3 weeks jail. Cameron didn't walk out of jail. When I was sitting down with Meredith Rose, you know, who edited my book as well as The Tall Man, who you know, the two of you helped me so much to make it readable. But we were meeting for the first time after 6 months, grappling with the final drafts at dinner downstairs, in fact, in a restaurant. And it was the first time I'd met Meredith. And just before we could even order, a email comes through from Lisa Watts, Dr. Lisa Watts, who is connected to the community up there and has lived there for a long time, with a very long email asking me if I could come up and assist. And I handed it to Meredith, and I just thought, look, I've just barely recovered, frankly, from Palm Island. Sure, it's 10 years on or 14 years on. And even seeing the email put me back, but I flicked it to my family, all of them, who are spread all over, and Sam. And I just asked them, should I do it? Should I do something about this? And of course, they were so quick, especially Zoe, the youngest, you know, who you know, and I really have explained how badly I did the parenting, but these children were so supportive to say, look, we've got to go and do this. So all we've done so far, and I'm mindful of sub judice issues, but all we've done so far is I've assembled a group of lawyers, you know, lawyers from Sydney, lawyers from Melbourne, barristers who'd been involved in similar cases with me before, to provide a protective cloak around the family and the community. So all we've been doing is explaining things of process, because this is so foreign, you know. I mean, for, you know, a community out in Yuendamu, for police to come to the door and shoot and kill somebody, that is not an experience that the rest of Australia has to experience much. Now, that whole community was now fearful of what their other children were going to suffer. So we've spent about 6 months trying to just explain process.
Yes.
And I've been up there 10 times, just getting a sense of trust, getting a sense of, of the time at which this will unfold. And I've read some of the evidence, and the police officer, oddly, has been charged before the criminal process. So his trial will proceed first. And using my usual hat as a defence lawyer, he's absolutely entitled to a fair trial in a forensic setting that determines his guilt or innocence. And that's if, in fact, if he can face his trial, he hasn't even had a committal. So I'm jealously going to protect that concept, at the same time ensure that this community gets the legal support that it needs.
Yeah.
And hopefully I won't personally have to appear in it. I mean, I've got such, senior and capable barristers around me who are willing to step up and do what's necessary. So,
did you feel as though you were, I mean, obviously they're completely different communities, but were there sort of echoes of the Palm case for you?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many common features, an absolute distrust within the community of authority and institutions, a real desire for an independent investigation. And they thought wrongly that they could appoint me to come and investigate the murder, and I had to explain the limitations of what we could do as lawyers, etc. Why I'm still reluctant about actually appearing in cases about that death is that I find the burden of looking at the faces of family and community and elders and children in these circumstances extremely difficult. I remember the glare of the mother of David West, who I've named in that book that we first spoke about. That sense of resigned acceptance that what you promised you didn't deliver. And I have a real sense that people in this situation deserve the most robust exploration of their instructions. Hence the need to be biculturally competent in every sense of getting the stories that need to get to the court. One of the issues in Palm Island, as you know, is that the third coroner found that he couldn't identify criminal culpability for Hurley because of the state of the evidence following a very tainted investigation.
Yes.
We've tried very hard to address that issue in Indigenous, and I can't comment on whether or not that has occurred or not yet because I haven't seen evidence. But so those are critical things I think that we need to embrace. That even though it's one of over 400 of these deaths, this is one that is occurring on our watch post George Floyd. This is one where the system has to understand that 14 years ago, everything went wrong, well, something went wrong. We have an opportunity. And whatever the result of the criminal trial, if the community can leave this situation with a sense of justice and a sense of an independent assessment of what happened, I think we will have achieved what we set out to do.
So you mentioned George Floyd. What do there's part of me that, and I know it's sort of probably, immature, that feels sort of annoyed that an international or death has made, why after all of these years? I mean, it's fantastic that suddenly we're taking to the street in these numbers, but tell me what you think about the sort of Black Lives Matter in our context.
Yeah. Look, it's such a sensitive conversation, isn't it? Especially if you've had some involvement with Indigenous people before this point. for me, it says something. I'm not sure what it says, that it took an American death to excite this emotion. I think it's days of social media and moral outrage, expressed in that arena. But I'm not going to be cynical about that, because that momentum is so important, because what is brought to us here, because of the much higher visibility that Black Americans have in the US as opposed to Indigenous people in Australia, in terms of a very vibrant voice in these areas, is that it just has reinstated in me that my learning from having some capacity in this space is because my children are Indigenous. I'm the only non-Indigenous person in my family. So I've had to break bread with my children, with their friends, with their relatives, with Jackie, the mother of my children. And as a result, I've been enriched by that. And through those connections, I've met extraordinary Indigenous people in my community who have cooked for me, I've cooked for them. I understand their family sense of being, etc. And I think if the one thing that can come from the Black Lives Matter conversation, or as one artist wrote, white lies matter.
Well, you should turn around and give the artists behind you their due.
Yeah, sure. Well, firstly, behind me on my right here is Richard Bell, and it says genocide is not illegal. And he's the painter that painted the other painting that's over in the corner, which I won't show, which is the title of my book. And over here is the edge of a painting by Vernon Arkey, who you know. I gave the police video of what happened on Palm Island, and he turned it into an art piece that is now going to be shown at the Tate Modern in London. So art is an important part of the conversation, and they can say in one image what I could prattle on about for a long time. I've lost my sense of answering the question you asked.
I think that I'm interested in whether or not we should feel Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I'm not going to give a very good answer. When I was preparing for conversations like this in the last week, I came across the Redfern speech, Keating's Redfern speech.
I know someone who's involved in that.
I know, and I'm careful to say it's the speech that he read out rather than calling it his speech.
Thank you.
But there's two things. Prime Minister of Australia now, all the things that he was lamenting, all the responsibilities he was saying that non-Aboriginal Australians needed to embrace, could be said now with greater urgency, because not much has changed. And sometimes people say to me that I'm a polemic on this issue, but the words are in the speech. We took the traditional lands and smashed the traditional way of life. We brought the diseases, the alcohol. We committed the murders. We took the children from their mothers. We practiced discrimination and exclusion. It was our ignorance and our prejudice and our failure to imagine that these things being done to us. With notable exceptions, we failed to make the most basic human response and enter into their hearts and minds. And that sense of notable exceptions is what cruels the conversation for me, because we are all responsible that we are still having to read those words with outrage. Yes. And that's all of us. It's not something that anybody can pretend to have changed. All those who operate in the criminal justice system might take a little bit of flinching from what I've said about some people or about the system, cohorts, but the statistics have got worse. We are collectively responsible for the state of affairs. So it's in that sense that I can't see protesting in the street as being the simple answer to the conversation. The political class have got to be brought with us, and they're nowhere near that. The statement of the heart is sidelined. The Wallamah Court in New South Wales is sidelined. I mean, these are important things being said to us, told to us, by Indigenous people after really careful consultation, we need to change, and we're not, you know, and it's in that sense that I lament that, you know, the closing, some of the words, the final sentence that Keating read, applies right now. It says, however intractable the problems seem, we cannot resign ourselves to failure any more than we can hide from the contemporary version of social Darwinism, which says to reach back to the poor, for the poor and dispossessed is to risk being dragged down. We need to understand that we have to give up a lot of our excesses to actually change the situation. And that goes back to the original thesis in my book, is that the laws in which criminal justice operate were not written for the people who are at the sharp end of how that law interfaces. It was a law written by men, assisted by legal scholars to protect their interests as colonizers. Now that's the framework under which our whole society has lived. And despite the Mabo decision talking about the fact that it's not right legally to say that no one was here, nothing much has changed. So I encourage the moral outrage, of course, but I think the conversation has got to spread in a much more nuanced way about what in fact is happening here. And my book is a really small book about such a big conversation.
It's also a book, and this is the last thing I want to quickly ask you, is it's a book that asks lawyers to sort of re-examine the work that they do, and it's particularly around these issues. So I want to sort of say to the 23-year-old who's you know, out there and is about to start their practice, you know, what would you say to them? What can they do? What kind of, I guess they should just buy your book. That's what you're going to say to them.
But it's also important to say that, so people don't switch off too much. It's not only about Indigenous issues, you know.
Of course, excuse me. And I should say that. And it's full of, you know, sometimes it includes, now I'm going to be the infomercial. It includes a whole range of issues, absolutely, which revolve around consent and, you know, murder and actually a whole raft of terrible things that people do to each other. So,
and why I say that is that I think even despite what's happening in recent months, people still are afraid to focus too much on Indigenous issues. So what I've tried to weave in there,
yes,
a collection, you know, 10 or 15 cases, which isn't my everyday work. You know, I mean, only about, you know, 10% of my cases involve Indigenous issues. But I thought it was important to pack as many of that in.
No, and the book is incredibly accessible and readable, and you know.
Stop it.
Yeah, right, no, shut up.
Now, what I would say is what I say to my daughter, you know,
Okay.
who's from Melbourne watching, who is a young lawyer. You know, she's a young woman. She's Indigenous. She's a child of migrants. She's had education, and she's a lawyer, and she has the capacity. And I would say to those who are equipped with those sorts of skills, use them. You know, notice things, and where you can, and where it's not right, act on that sense of outrage that we all have about these things. And everybody can, you know, do what they can best do. They keep their eyes open, notice, and act on what they see.
I know that there are other people who want to ask you questions. So, Chrissy, I'm going to sort of hand over.
Great, thanks, Chloe. There are quite a few questions here, so I will just jump into them. Emma has asked, what makes a case worthy of asking your children, who you obviously respect their opinion on it? So is there like a line where you only ask your children whether it's okay to take cases?
Oh no, it's far more pragmatic. I've never done that before. It was more because I know that my absence from their lives when I undertake big cases has a deleterious effect upon them and on me. And it means a compromise. If I'm going to go into Central Australia, 10 times as I've done in the last year, it's time I don't have with my family. So I was really asking for their permission to be away, really.
It's really great that you do that, actually. So many people don't. There's a question here from Sheena, which is, and it's a question that's also been asked by a few other people tonight too, really, in other ways. How do you think we are progressing as a legal system? Change does take a long time, but do you have a sense that we are moving forward, and that we're taking things forward as a society to make sure that people are cared for fairly?
Yeah, I haven't done a revision of how the criminal justice system has coped with in the last century or so of its functioning. But the one thing I will say is this: one of the most significant changes that has happened to the judiciary in the last 20 years has been the appointment of women to the bench. And there could be no doubt that that has resulted in greater justice for the community at large. The judicial cohort is made up, at least on gender terms, reflecting the community. Now, if we accept that as a proposition, and most would, say for perhaps those judges who missed out now, if we understand that the community in which we are in is far more diverse, and once we have a more diverse judicial cohort, their exercise of discretion will be informed with a real sense of understanding of what it is said to be community standards, which is often an issue to be assessed by judges. So I think when we grow up as a country, the system will get fairer.
Mike has asked about your title. There's a couple of people who have talked about your title, actually, the title of your book. And so Mike has said that your book encompasses truth-telling. How aligned are you with the notion of truth-telling in the Uluru Statement? And is there a leader in the current political arena who has the leadership skills to address the issue of acceptance of the statement?
Well, going to the last question, it's shocking, isn't it, that two former High Court judges have written and explained how constitutionally cogent it is to have a voice in Parliament. Judges who have sat at the apex of the Australian judicial system have told the political class, this is not a threat to democracy, this is not a threat to the function of government. All you're hearing is the voice of the people, Indigenous people, about laws that affect them in a cogent, articulated way. To reject that is nonsense. It's taken both sides of Parliament a long time to grapple with this. My hope is it becomes an issue following George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, that a conservative politician on either side of Parliament can embrace that responsibility.
There's a question from Sonia who asks, who says that she knows that Alan Dershowitz was one of your major role models. Is that still the case? And everyone deserves a fair trial, but some people are more equal before the law than others, aren't they?
There's something wrong with your connection. I couldn't hear.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, it's saying that my internet connection is having trouble, but can you hear me now?
I can now, yes.
Yeah, great. So Alan Dershowitz apparently was one of your major role models. Is he still a role model for you?
I don't think he ever was a role model, but there were some things he said had a certain resonance for me at a time when I was doing some difficult cases, unpopular cases, and one of which is that the justice in a system is best assessed by how it deals with those who have been deemed to be most obviously guilty by the media. And when I was doing the Lads case, it was something that meant something to me. Look, he's one of many. You know, there are that have informed my sense of how to approach criminal justice. And like me, he would have been involved in many things which other people, the liberal-minded, would not approve of. So I don't see him as a hero in any sense, but I thought some of the things that he has written about criminal justice was very informative.
And there's a comment, I suppose, from Jamie about your advocacy has had a particularly regional focus in outback Australia. And do you see that as having made changes to those areas?
Well, that's not fair to say. It may be the cases we spoke about today have been regional, but I'd just say my day-to-day trade as a barrister is very much Sydney, Brisbane based. I have done cases in a lot of these other places which have really educated me, but I have no sense of regional Australia to really answer that sort of question.
Mm. And someone with just a number instead of a name asks you about the part that your parents have played in you as a person. Like, do you feel like you've learnt your ability to advocate from your parents?
I've spent some time giving regard to my upbringing and my parents. The one thing I would say is this: what brave people to leave their country of birth, their country of history, their country of culture, to take their children across the world in search of a better education for them when a despot came into power. You know, refugees are such brave people, my parents were, and that has taught me much more than anything else in my life. It's instilled in me a sense of respect for the bravery of people who look after their children and in the pursuit of hope and happiness. So that's what I took from them. I'm sure that finally my father would rest comfortably looking back at what I have done to manifest his investment in me. And my dear mother, who's probably listening, will just complain that I got the cooking recipes wrong in the book.
And a final question from Hassan, who asks about young people coming up now. Do you think that they can be successful and do well at the bar? Should they go to the bar straight away? Or should they, wait before they go to the bar?
Yeah, again, your question got muted, but I got the gist of the question. Look, I think you're ready to go to the bar when you think you are. And if you've got support around you financially, you go when you're ready. I was a lawyer for 19 years before I came to the bar. So at the same time, I started my own practice when I was 23. So I would say to Hassan that he has to be realistic, not as delusional as I was about my ability, but get there and do it when you think you're ready.
Look, I am having a few internet problems right now, so I think that it's time that we probably thank you both and open the floor for a round of applause. So thank you, Chloe, for your questions. It was really interesting to listen to, and thanks, Andrew, for your book, which of course is available at the link that I've been sharing, and please, I encourage everybody to get a copy of that book. And also, I'd like you to encourage people who live in Victoria or in Melbourne to seek out their local bookshop down there, because I know that Victorians and Melbourne bookshops are doing it really hard at the moment. So please do feel free to bypass us if you live in that area and go to your local and buy this book from there. So thank you, everybody. And I'm going to open the room up so that people can unmute themselves and we can do a final round of applause. So thank you very much, Chloe and Andrew Boe. Congratulations. Congratulations. See you later. Bye.